Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is called How Sure Can We Be? How sure can we be? According to J. Barton Payne's Encyclopedia of Biblical Prophecy, the Bible contains at least 8,362 predictive verses and 1,817 specific prophecies, predictions on over 737 different matters. Other scholars might catalogue them a little differently, but it would appear that most of the Bible is prophetic. William Thomson, who later was known as Lord Kelvin, one of the great men of science, is famous for pointing out that until we measure a thing, we really know very little about it. It is one thing to point out a little verse here and how it is fulfilled there, but it can prove so much more meaningful if we can do that in a way that is a little bit more quantitative, more systematic, more measurable. In order to do that, we are going to examine a few prophecies in the Old Testament. There is one fact about the Old Testament we can verify from any encyclopedia. The Hebrew scriptures, those which we call the Old Testament, were translated into Greek by 270 BC, and this process was started about 285 BC, so it took 15 years. This was done by Ptolemy Philadelphia II, who funded 70 scholars to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Now this is extremely important because it is a matter of history that these scriptures were in wide circulation 3 centuries before the Gospel period. In fact, most of the quotations from the Old Testament in the New Testament are from this Greek translation, known as the Septuagint, which is a word meaning 70. In other words, it is a matter of secular record that the Old Testament was in black and white, a tangible form, 3 centuries before Jesus was preaching in Israel. These scriptures in print and circulated well before the time of Christ contain more than 300 prophecies detailing the coming Messiah, and all of them were fulfilled in the 1st century AD. Let's have a look at some examples, say just the ones that are quoted in the New Testament as being fulfilled by Jesus. I've got a small list here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the prophecy, then I'm going to give the Old Testament reference where the prophecy was made, and the New Testament reference where the prophecy was fulfilled. I'm not going to read those verses, it will take too long, because there's a certain aspect that I want to get to in this video, so just stick with me. So, are you ready? He was to be of David's family, prophesied in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 and 13, and fulfilled in Matthew 1 verse 1. He would be born of a virgin, prophesied in Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14, and fulfilled in Matthew 1 verse 23. He would be born in Bethlehem, prophesied in Micah 5 verse 2, and fulfilled in Matthew 2 verse 6. He would sojourn or travel in Egypt, prophesied in Hosea 11 verse 1 and fulfilled in Matthew 2 verse 15. He would minister in Galilee and in Nazareth, prophesied in Isaiah chapter 9 verses 1 and 2 and fulfilled in Matthew chapter 4 verses 12 and 17. He would be announced in advance by an Elijah type herald, prophesied in Isaiah 40 verses 3 to 5 and Malachi chapter 3 verse 1 and fulfilled in Mark chapter 1 verses 2 and 3. He would occasion the massacre of Bethlehem's children, prophesied in Jeremiah 31 verse 15 and fulfilled in Matthew chapter 2 verse 8. His mission would include the Gentiles, prophesied in Isaiah 42 verse 6 and fulfilled in Luke chapter 2 verse 32. His ministry would be one of healing, prophesied in Isaiah 35 verses 5 to 6 and fulfilled in Matthew chapter 12 verses 10 to 14 and Mark chapter 7 verses 32 to 35 and chapter 10 verse 51. He would teach through the use of parables, prophesied in Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 49 and fulfilled in Matthew 13 verse 3. He would be disbelieved and rejected by the religious rulers of that period. Psalm 118 verse 22 and fulfilled in Matthew 21 verses 12 and 13. He would make a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, prophesied in Zechariah chapter 9 verse 9 and fulfilled in Matthew chapter 1 verses 6 to 9. He would be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, prophesied in Zechariah chapter 11 verse 12 and fulfilled in Matthew 26 verse 15. He would be smitten like a shepherd and his sheep scattered, prophesied in Zechariah chapter 13 verse 7 and fulfilled in Matthew 26 verse 31. He would be given vinegar and gall, and they would cast lots for his garments, prophesied in Psalm 22 verse 18 and Psalm 69 verse 21, and fulfilled in Matthew 27 verse 34 and John 19 verses 23 and 24. He would be pierced, prophesied in Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10 and fulfilled in John chapter 19 verse 34. Not a bone of his would be broken, prophesied in Exodus chapter 12 verse 46 and Psalm 34 verse 20 and fulfilled in John chapter 19 verses 33 and 36. He would die among criminals, prophesied in Isaiah 53 verse 12 and fulfilled in Mark 15 verse 28. He would be buried by a rich man, prophesied in Isaiah 53 verse 9 and fulfilled in Matthew 27 verses 57 to 60. He would rise from the dead on the third day, prophesied in Psalm 16 verse 10 and Jonah 1 verse 17 and fulfilled in Luke 24 verses 6 to 7. His resurrection would be followed by the destruction of Jerusalem, prophesied in Daniel chapter 9 verse 26 and fulfilled in Matthew 24 verse 2. Now there are many more, but these give us just a sample of the kind of prophecies that were specifically fulfilled in Christ. Now for the purposes of this video, we're going to have a look at 8 of the simplest prophecies concerning the coming of the Messiah, but we're going to try to quantify them to estimate their probabilities as we go. So if you're ready, let's do that. So prophecy number 1, Micah 5 verse 2, but thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall he come forth unto me, that is to be the ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. So this one may be quite familiar to a lot of us. There are many amazing things hidden in this verse, not just that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem, but that he pre-existed from eternity past. However, the point we want to extract here is simply that the Messiah clearly would be born in Bethlehem. So we might be asking ourselves, what was the probability of someone being born in Bethlehem over the past 2,000 years? Well, we can take a look at the world and start zeroing in on the Middle East, then Israel, then the Jerusalem region, then south of Jerusalem into Bethlehem, which has remained pretty much unchanged in population throughout history. So what is the probability that somebody we might meet over a period of 2,000 years would have been born in Bethlehem? Oh, let's have a look, shall we? So let's use round numbers and staying conservative. We won't go wild. Let's assume that the population of Bethlehem is less than 10,000. Let's assume that the average world population at any point in time over the past 2,000 years is something in the region of 1 billion people. So the probability that someone picked at random would be from Bethlehem is something in the region of 1 in 100,000. And that's a generous estimate. What about the second one? Zechariah 9 verse 9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass," that is a donkey, "and upon a colt, the foal of an ass." Okay, so this second one is a well-known prophecy and famous verse because Jesus deliberately fulfilled it in the triumphal entry. However, the question here is, how many people throughout history have presented themselves as king in Jerusalem riding on a donkey? Well, I've got no idea, to be honest, but if we said less than 1 in 100, that would be more than safe. So let's take that figure. Less than 1 in 100 people have presented themselves as a king in Jerusalem riding on a donkey. How about this one then, number 3, Zechariah chapter 11 verse 12. "If you think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear." So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. So let's consider this little phrase from God in Zechariah. Most of us are aware that the fact is that this is the precise amount that Jesus was betrayed for by Judas Iscariot. The question then is, how many people throughout history have been betrayed for precisely 30 pieces of silver? Well, I don't happen to know of any others, but if we say that less than 1 in 1,000, we would be well within the limits of reason. How about this one then, number 4, Zechariah chapter 11 verse 13. "And the Lord said unto me, Cast it under the potter, a goodly price that I was prized at of them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord." So this verse is immediately following the previous prophecy, and it gives additional details which we will treat separately. In the New Testament we read, "Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented, and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? Very hard-hearted. See thou to that. You deal with it." And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. So the 30 pieces of silver that Judas had been paid ended up on the temple floor. What happened next is that the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, "It is not lawful for to put them in the treasury, because it is the price of blood." And they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. The priests couldn't put that type of money into the treasury because that would violate the law. As we saw in a previous video, they were actually very corrupt. So this is a very selective thing that they did. But they decided they could use the cash to prepay some expenses. If a stranger died in Jerusalem, the temple was responsible to take care of the funeral and burial arrangements. And since there happened to be a potter's field that was being offered at a bargain price at the time, they took the cash and brought the field as a place in which to bury strangers. Notice the details in Zechariah chapter 11 verse 13. The price is 30 pieces of silver. The transaction takes place in the house of the Lord, the temple, and the potter who owns the field ends up with the money. The question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the probability that all of these details would be fulfilled by chance? I could say 1 in a million and probably support it, but certainly the chances would not be better than 1 in 100,000. How about number 5, the fifth one, Zechariah chapter 13 verse 6. And one shall say unto him, What are these wounds in your hands? Then he shall answer, Those for which I was wounded in the house of my friends. Bit strange, this one, a bit confusing. Does it make sense? The more we look at it, or maybe we think about it, Jesus' crucifixion did not seem to fit the verse's description of him being wounded in the house of my friends. But if we look at John chapter 20, which describes Jesus appearing to his disciples after his resurrection, of course on this first evening Thomas wasn't with them. And when he was told later that Jesus had appeared to the others, he said, Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe. That's why we called him Doubting Thomas. Thomas would not be convinced unless he saw for himself. And then the Bible continues, and after 8 days, again his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. Then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst of them, and said, Peace be unto you. Then he said to Thomas, Reach here your finger, behold my hands, and reach here your hand, and thrust it into my side. Be not faithless, but be believing. And Thomas answered and said unto him, My Lord and my God. And Jesus said unto him, Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. So there is a verse in Zechariah chapter 13 which states, What are these wounds in your hands? Then he shall answer, Those with which I was wounded in the house of my friends. That doesn't refer to the wounds Jesus received from the nails. It referred to the wounds of Thomas's unbelief. What about your unbelief? Are you wounding Jesus still? So, if we take from Zechariah chapter 13 verse 6, the fact that Jesus was wounded in his hands, how many people in the world during the past 2,000 years have been wounded in their hands? If we say less than 1 in 1,000, we would be making a generous allowance. So, how about this one? Isaiah 53 verse 7, number 6 this is, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. How many prisoners accused of a capital crime make no defence, even though they are innocent? Good question, don't you think? I suspect if we scan the court records of history, we could find someone, maybe a few, who were accused of a capital crime facing the death penalty and yet made no defence. But if we say conservatively that certainly that less than 1 in 1,000 have done so, again it would be more than generous. How about this one, number 7, Isaiah 53 verse 9. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. This is a strange apparent contradiction. His grave is with the wicked, and yet he is with the rich in his death. So based on that, we might ask, how many people have died among the wicked that were buried among the rich? Again, we can say less than 1 in 1,000 and be well within reason. How about this one, number 8? And we'll finish with this one. Psalm 22 verse 16. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. From the Psalms, this reads as though it were dictated in the first person singular as Jesus hung on the cross, even though it was written 800 years earlier. Let's pick just one of the phrases here. They pierced my hands and feet. What makes this remarkable is that it was written by David 700 years before crucifixion was invented. Remember that in Israel, the form of capital punishment was stoning, not crucifixion. Crucifixion was invented by the Persians about 90 BC and was adopted by the Romans. But here, 800 years before the fact, all of Psalm 22 graphically portrays crucifixion. In fact, there have been articles in many medical journals based on Psalm 22 analysing the medical cause of death by crucifixion. So the question is then, how many people taken at random have died by having their hands and their feet pierced in crucifixion? A lot of people probably have, but I propose that less than 1 in 10,000 people have been killed by a crucifixion-like method. That would be generous. I think I'll leave it there for this video. The probabilities are very reasonable that only Jesus Christ could have fulfilled all of these prophecies. He is the only one. I'll leave you to think about that. So I want to thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one. Bye bye.